In this video, you're going to create and run your very first Node.js-based server. This is going to offer users an entirely new way to interact with your applications. Instead of needing to run commands from the terminal to interact with your app, they'll be able to visit a URL. And by the end of this video, you're going to have a URL you can visit in the browser to interact with your Node.js application. With the Node server, we can serve up whatever our application needs. So imagine I'm trying to create a portfolio website to show off my work. I can create a Node server that serves up all of the assets the browser would need to load. This would include HTML documents, CSS files to style the page, client-side JavaScript, and maybe some images of my work. Now we could also take the other approach with the server, and instead of serving up a website, we could serve up an HTTP JSON-based API. That would be similar to the Mapbox or the Dark Sky API, where we're exchanging JSON data back and forth with the server. Now we are going to explore both approaches throughout the class. We're going to start off by creating simpler web servers. Then once we're comfortable with that, we're going to move on to create HTTP-based APIs with database storage, authentication, email sending, and more. As mentioned in the section introduction, the tool we're going to use to create our Node servers is the very popular Express library. You can find Express on the web over at express.js.com. Express is one of the original NPM packages, and it's one of my favorite. Express definitely helped put Node.js on the map back in the day because it made it so easy to create web servers. Whether you wanted to serve up something like a static website, or whether you wanted to create a complex HTTP JSON-based API to serve as the back end for something like a mobile or web application. Now we're going to use Express extensively throughout the class, but I wanted to take a moment to show you where you can find it on the web so you know where you can go to learn more. They have a great getting started guide, though we'll cover all of this in the class. They also have a guide for doing more complex and advanced things, which we'll also cover. And finally, they have a great API reference, which serves as the low-level documentation for every single method and tool available. Now, in this video in particular, the goal is to get a basic server up and running. I want to be able to pull up a URL in the browser and see an asset that my server served up. And that is exactly what we're going to do right now. To do this, we're going to create a brand new directory. So let's head over to Visual Studio Code. I'm going to close all open files, collapse all open directories, and we're going to make a brand new one inside of the Node course folder. Right here, we can call this something like Web Server. Perfect. And now we're going to install and use Express. Inside of the terminal, let's take a quick moment to navigate into our new directory. That would be cd web server, since I'm currently inside of the Node course directory. And once I'm in the web server folder, we need to initialize npm so we can actually install Express, which is indeed an npm module. So right here, I'm going to use npm init. Now we could just run this and then fill out the individual fields for package.json. As mentioned earlier though, we can just use the Y flag, which is just going to answer yes using the default value for each question, and that's perfectly fine since we were going to use the defaults anyways. I run the command, and what do I get? I get a package.json file. Now that we have this in place, we can install the Express library. That would be npm I express at the latest version, which is 4.16.4. I'm going to run the installer, and once that's done, we can focus on actually creating a Node.js script that will create, configure, and start up the server. Now, I'm going to do this in a brand new directory. So in the web server folder, I'm going to create a subdirectory called source, or src for short. And this is where we're going to end up putting all of our Node.js scripts. So instead of having them in the root of the project, like we did with the Notes app and with the Weather app, we're going to go ahead and keep things a bit more organized. So I can show you how to create a more complex directory structure that's going to scale a little better as your application starts to grow. So as things get more complex, it's going to be more important to stay organized. Now that we have things in place, let's go ahead and clear the terminal output down below and create a single file in the source folder. This is going to be the starting point to our Node application, and I'm going to call this app.js. In here, we're going to load in Express, configure it to serve something up, and then we're going to start the server. To get started, let's create a new constant so we can load the library in. I'm going to create a constant Express, and I'll use require to grab the library exports. And what the Express library exposes is just a single function. So Express is actually a function as opposed to something like an object, and we call it to create a new Express application. And that is exactly what we're going to do just a single time right below. Right here, let's create a new variable to store our Express application. I'm going to call this something like app, and all we do to generate the application is call Express. Now, the Express function doesn't take in any arguments. Instead, we configure our server by using various methods provided on the application itself. That means this line is all done, and down below we can start to tell our Express application what exactly it should do. For this example, imagine we owned the following domain, app.com. Now, obviously, when someone visits app.com, we want to show them something, maybe the home page for our company website, but we're going to have other pages as well, like app.com/help or app.com/about. So right here, we have one domain, app.com, and all of it's going to run on a single Express server. What we have set up, though, are multiple routes. We have the root route, we have /help, we have /about, and we could add others. So how do we set up our server to send a response when someone tries to get something at a specific route? We set that up using a method on app. It is app.get. This lets us configure what the server should do when someone tries to get the resource at a specific URL. Maybe we should be sending back HTML, or maybe we should be sending back JSON. Now, the get method, which we're going to use a ton throughout the class, takes in two arguments. The first is the route, so the partial URL. That would be nothing for this first example, /help for the second, or /about for the third. And it also takes in a function. Now, the function is where we describe what we want to do when someone visits this particular route. So in this case, when someone visits the home page, this function would describe what to send back to them. Now, this function gets called with two very important arguments. The first is an object containing information about the incoming request to the server. This is commonly called REQ, which is short for request. You'll see this used throughout the documentation. The other argument is the response. So this contains a bunch of methods allowing us to customize what we're going to send back to the requester. This is commonly called RES, which is short for response. Now down below, we can go ahead and look at the request to figure out what we want to do. We could do something like read data from the database or create some HTML. And we could use various methods on response to actually send a response back. Let's go ahead and stick with a very basic text response, just displaying some text in the browser. To get that done, we're going to use response.send. This allows us to send something back to the requester. So if someone's making a request from code using something like the npm request library, they'll get this back. If they're making the request from the browser, this is what's going to display in the browser window. Right here, we're going to pass in a string, and we're going to stick with a simple message like hello, Express, perfect. Now that we have this in place, we have something that's going to show up at the root URL, and now the last thing we need to do is actually start the server up. Currently, the server is not up and running. If we were to run the application, we would never be able to view it in the browser. To start the server up, we have to use one more method on app, which we'll only ever use a single time in our application. That is app.listen. This starts up the server, and it has it listen on a specific port. For the moment, we're going to use a common development port, which is port 3000. Now, port 3000 is obviously not the default port. When you visit a website, you don't provide the port because there are default ports. For example, for an HTTP-based website, it is port 80. As we explore production deployment a little bit later in the class, we'll learn how to use those ports. But for now, in our local development environment, as we're just viewing things on our local machine, port 3000 is going to work really well. Now, the other optional argument we can pass to the listen method is a callback function which just runs when the server is up and running. The process of starting up a server is an asynchronous process, though it'll happen almost instantly. Right here, though, we could print a little message to the console, just letting the person who's running the application know the server did start correctly. So right here, server is up on port 3000. Now, this message is never going to display to someone in the browser. That is what this message is for. This is just going to display as a useful piece of information when running the application. Down below, let's go ahead and do just that. We can start up the server by using Node. Now, since the file isn't in the root of the web server project, we'll use source/app.js, providing the complete path to it. And if we run the script, you'll notice that basically instantly, server is up on port 3000 prints. The other thing you'll notice is that it's been maybe 10 seconds since I originally ran the command, and we haven't been brought back to the command prompt to run something else. That is because the Node process is still up and running. With the Notes app or the Weather app, there was some discrete task that needed to be completed. I needed to read a note or I needed to fetch the weather information for a given location. When that task was done, the Node process was closed. With the web server, it's never going to stop unless we stop it, because its job is to stay up and running, listening and processing new incoming requests. So it's staying up and running, so if someone does visit the root of our website, they can get a response right away. Now that means that it is going to stay up and running as long as we let it. We can always shut it down using Control-C. That'll shut down the web server and bring us back to the command prompt, and we could always start it again if we need to. Now that our server is up and running, let's go ahead and visit it in the browser. I'm going to crack open a new tab in the browser, and since we're running the server on our local machine, we're not going to be able to access it off of our machine, and we're not going to be able to access it from a real domain. We'll learn how to do that sort of thing when we explore production deployment. For now, the server is only accessible on our machine, and we can access it at localhost. Now, it's localhost port 3000. That is the port we chose to listen on when we called app.listen. So right here, colon to provide the port, and then 3000. If I visit this, what do I see? Right here, I get my message, Hello Express, printing to the screen. So when we visited that URL in the browser, it went off to our server. The Express server found the matching route, which is this one, for the root, and it processed the request using our handler. The handler used response.send to send back a text response, and that is exactly what we're seeing inside of the browser. Now to set up a second route, we just add another call to app.get. So down below the first one, I'll add a second one, and we're still going to pass in that string, though this time we're going to provide the new route. So instead of nothing for the root of our website, we're going to use /help for the help page. So right inside of here, /help. Now, what do we want to do when someone visits that URL? We're going to go ahead and set up our function telling the Express server what it should do. We're going to get our two arguments, request and response. And for the moment, we are once again going to use response.send to send something back. Right here, I'll just display a title for the page like help page. Perfect. Now that we have this in place, we are going to need to restart our server for the changes to take effect. Right now, the currently running server has no idea you've added something to the file. We can always fix this by shutting the server down with Control-C and starting it up again, but instead of doing that over and over again, we'll just use nodemon, which we installed earlier. So nodemon space source/app.js, that's going to start up the server, and it's going to restart the server whenever we make a change to app.js and save it. Now over in the browser, I can refresh the root to still see Hello Express. I could also head over to /help to view my help page. Now, if I was to visit any other URL, which I didn't have set up, like /about, what are we going to see? We're going to see an error message, cannot get /about. Later on, we'll learn how to set up a 404 page, for routes that we don't have support set up for, but that's a slightly more complex topic, and it'll come up a bit later. For now, it is challenge time, where you're going to add a few new routes to our web server on your own. Down below, I have the challenge comments outlining what I'd like you to do. Right here, you are going to set up 2 new routes for the server. So we already have 2. You'll be adding 2 more for a grand total of 4. 1, you're going to set up an about route and render a page title. That means when I visit this URL, I should see something like about page showing up. And number 2, you're going to set up a weather route. And there you can render a title for that page as well. Something like view weather or show weather would get the job done. The exact text you show isn't important. What is important is that when you visit your 2 URLs in the browser, you see the text you chose. So take some time to add those 2 new routes to our Express server, visit both in the browser, making sure they're showing up, and when you're done, come back and click play. How'd that go? Let's kick things off by setting up the about route. So once again, if we want to support a new route, we have to set a new one up with app.get. Right here, we provide those 2 arguments /about for the route, and then we provide our callback function telling Express what to do when someone visits this route. Now we get some information about the request, which we haven't used so far, but we'll use pretty extensively later on in the class, and we get our response, which we do indeed need in order to send something back. Down below, we'll be using response.send to send back a message. I will just print about. Now with this in place, I should be able to save the file. NodeMon automatically restarted the server, and if I refresh the browser, I can see my text showing up, which is fantastic. Next up, we can set up the weather page. So down below, that's going to be app.get /weather would get the job done, though maybe you picked something slightly different. That's a-okay. And from here, we'll set up our callback function. We're going to define the request and response arguments, and then we're going to send our response down below using response.send. What are we going to send back? I'll just send back something like your weather perfect. Now we have 4 routes in place, and we can test things out. Over here in the browser, I'm going to switch from /about to /weather, and what do I get? I get your weather showing up. So now we have a root page, we have a help page, an about page, and a weather page, and our little application is really coming together. Down below, I'm going to go ahead and delete the comments from earlier, as well as the challenge comments, and I'll wrap the video up by saving our file. Now that we have a basic Express server in place, we're going to be able to continue expanding off of this, learning how we can render HTML, learning how we can render JSON, or serve up assets from a directory on our machine. I'm excited to get to all of that and more, so let's jump right in to the next video.